So, welcome to the Cal Mentorship Interest Group's Let's Connect Spotlight series. My name is Christine Krieger, and I am the professional development consultant for the Colorado State Library and co-chair of the Mentorship Interest Group, who is bringing you this Spotlight series. And I am delighted to introduce Rose Nelson, who is the Assistant Director of the Colorado Alliance, a nonprofit consortium of research libraries. And Rose is also a co-chair of the Mentorship Interest Group. So, welcome, Rose.
Thank you, Christine.
So
Happy to be here.
oh, thank you. Yeah. So I think we'll go ahead and jump into the questions. So the first question is, how and where do you find inspiration in your work?
Yeah, so this is really a good question because I've had a lot of years to kind of think about that and kind of find where do I find that inspiration. And what I've noticed kind of over my career is that I really find a lot of inspiration working on group projects, working with others, collaborating. That's really where I find my most energy, my most passion, and where I'm happiest with work. And I think it's just, I don't know if it's funny because I kind of consider myself an introvert, but for some reason, and I don't know if it's just like being around other like-minded people or something in libraries, but I really thrive when I can work with other people on projects. And I have to say though that there's also time for working alone. And what I've learned is that you kind of have to have both. And I really need that time sometimes just to think about something. A lot of these things, projects or things that we work on require a lot of processing. You need time to step back, think about it, like maybe somebody introduces a new idea or a new project. A lot of times you can't just launch right in with working with other people, but if you give yourself some time to really think about it alone, or another time when I need to work alone is like if I'm learning a new skill, for example, it's really better to have that time to absorb the information and then come back and share ideas with other people. And I think that's a really good combination of working for me. The other source of inspiration is really what inspires me is to know that what I'm doing is making a difference. And I think that we all feel that way about our work. I've definitely had those times where it's like, why are we doing this? Does it make a difference? Is anybody going to notice? And I really find that those are the times when I don't like my job and I just really lose motivation. And so I think knowing that you're having an impact, it doesn't even almost matter what that impact is. I mean, maybe it's feeding the homeless, but maybe it's working on making the software better so that people can find things in Prospector, or putting together a policy that's really going to change the direction of something. So that to me, it's just really important to all have that impact. So.
Yeah. And I like how you said kind of the balance of working with others and kind of getting that energy and collaboration, and also
Right.
allowing that time to kind of think and reflect, which I think some of
Yes.
us don't always give ourselves, or the
Right.
world doesn't always want to give us that. So thank you.
Exactly.
So question number 2, was there a time that you messed up and felt like you had failed? And if so, how did you bounce back?
Yeah, so that's also a very good good question, and when throughout my working journey, yes, there have been lots of failures, and I guess probably the one that stands out the most relevant to libraries is actually when I was working at the state library, and we had adopted WebJunction. It was in the early 2000s, and it was just a pilot at that point. It wasn't, it was basically a resource for like library staff resources. Basically, it was a portal. And there were like online learning and things like that. But it was at the very beginning of online learning. And so it was clunky, it didn't work well. And really there wasn't a strong, at least in my mind, reason why we were doing it. Yet I had to do this project. And it was kind of up to me to get library staff, my colleagues at the state library, to contribute to the website, to WebJunction, but also librarians out there in the field doing their work. And the problem, I think the biggest problem was it really replicated. There was no reason behind it. It wasn't adding value at that time. Now, I won't say that about today's WebJunction. I think is something completely different. And I don't know that what we had was a portal for the Colorado, and then there was like a main Web Junction site. So really, there's just a lot of duplication there. But, it was kind of my job to kind of get people to adopt it and to use it and to add their own resources to it. And I remember asking, well, is there a way that you can tie this some way to like evaluation so that people are doing this as part of their job? And they didn't want to do that. It was like, well, no, we don't want to force people because then but then, it really, what ended up happening in the end was that we didn't adopt it widely. We ended up doing the pilot year, but then after that, it kind of fizzled out. And I felt kind of, because I had some other projects at the state library that went better. And I think at that point, it was sort of like, I don't want to say the last straw, but maybe it was, and I was ready, like I was kind of ready to move on at that point. But, what I learned from it, I don't know if there was really a bounce back from it, but what I think I learned is that, you just because it's the shiny new object, a lot of times you really need to step back and decide, why are you doing this? How is it going to help what we already have? Is there a reason to have it? And think about those bigger questions before you just kind of jump in and launch something.
Mhm.
And so I think that's a really valuable lesson that I can apply to other projects and things that I work on in my job today. So I think it was a good lesson, I think, for everyone. I don't want to place blame on anyone, but it was something that definitely did not work out. And maybe I could have been better also at articulating to, the management, well, this is like just a really dumb project. It's a very hard thing to do. But figure out a way to say that this doesn't make sense. Why are we doing this? So
Yeah. Well, thank you, Rose. Yes.
Mhm.
So the next question is, what books, podcasts, or movies would you suggest that others read, listen, or watch?
Yeah, well, this is a good one because I love podcasts, and I think I've been listening to them for like a decade or something. I mean, it's kind of crazy to think how long, it's just kind of part of my routine now. And I listen for a variety of types of podcasts. Some of them are personal growth, other things are just like entertainment or hobbies. And then I've kind of gotten sort of spilled over into professional development podcasts. And the one that I would recommend to people in our field is the Library Leadership Podcast.
Mhm.
I think that's actually the name. It's just called the Library Leadership Podcast, and I'm forgetting the host's name, but she does interviews with different professionals in the field, and they talk about different topics. There was somebody who talked about library research and staff morale and just a variety of topics. And I just find it really interesting and a lot of times inspiring to hear about other people's jobs and what they're doing and what makes them excited or what resources they can share. And then in terms of books, there's a lot of authors, and one that I think crosses over into personal development and professional is Brene Brown. I like a lot of her personal growth work, but also she talks about leadership, and I think she really resonates with a lot of people. And so she's someone that I've always liked over the years. Simon Sinek and Adam Grant are also two really good writers that I like in the professional world. And I just think they have a great way of talking about leadership and, things like work-life balance and just a lot of really thoughtful ideas from both of them. And they both, well, at least Adam Grant has a podcast and he has books. And so those are two that I really like. And then for some personal development, um, Atomic Habits is really good by James Clear. I just love, and then the other one I was going to mention is Cal Newport with Deep Work. And what I like about those, well, both of them, the habits thing was really interesting because there's so many things we do that are habits that you would never even think of as a habit, but you realize, oh my God, I've been doing this for this long, and how do you? It's provides a lot of clarity in how to live and how to like live more intentionally and to figure out what things do I want to set as good habits, or how do I find it really, for me, I kind of like organization and kind of a strategy to my day. And I think that that book really, Atomic Habits really helps with that. And then with deep work, what I really appreciate about it is getting away from your distractions, even if it's 30 minutes a day or an hour a day, and really spending time getting into that flow state with work, which I think is really cool if you can do it. I mean, I think it takes time, but I really appreciate those books because they really kind of force you to get engaged in what you'll notice is like, and I've used this before, is like, oh, well, that 30 minutes went by so fast. Like I'll be like there'll be something I don't want to do, but if I just give it that time and really let myself get into it, I realize how engaging it can be. So,
Well, I now have added a couple more resources to my list of things to watch and read, so thank you for that. The next question is, what questions are you asking yourself lately?
yeah, so that's also another good question. Now that I'm kind of towards, not at the very end of my career, but I'm kind of moving towards the end of my career. And so I have been asking those questions. I've been at the Alliance for 17 years, which is a really long time. And I think one of the things that you have to do if you've been at a job for a really long time is to make sure you're growing, make sure you're still making a difference and contributing. And so I do ask myself that, like, how can I continue to contribute? And it's easy to stagnate. And I will say that in every job I've had periods where I felt very stagnant or just like not excited about the work. I would say, well, one thing with the Alliance that's helped is that we are, do a lot with software development. And so there's always new features added to certain things and things are changing, believe it or not. Things do the software that we use or, things like we're adding the state library to Prospector, that's been a different project. But what you have to, one of the things I tried to remember and to bring to work is that like in 2020, it was an interesting year because when I had always thought, oh, it'd be great if I could just work from home a lot. And so all of a sudden that became a reality. And it was like, wow, this is really happening. But what I realized early in to the pandemic is that, it actually isn't as glamorous or it's not necessarily what you think it is. I did miss people, believe it or not. I really kind of missed having that interaction and like spontaneity of meetings and things like that. While I appreciated working from home, and actually I still do mostly work from home, I did miss some interactions with people. And I noticed that one of the things that I really had to kind of be aware of is if I approach my day passively, just answering emails and responding and, kind of working on things, but just sort of plodding through the day, I felt really kind of depressed at the end of the day. And so one thing I've noticed is things like deep work have really helped me to just like set aside that time and really get engaged in something. And the other thing I've noticed is that when I like my work the best, a lot of times it's when I'm struggling or when I'm struggling to learn something new. It's interesting because I can get so frustrated with things that's like, God, why can't I understand this or why isn't this working? But those things that you work really, really hard on, whether it's writing or learning new software or learning new skills, that to me is where the value is. And that's truly what makes work worth it is when you're actually challenging yourself. And I think I have to have that, regardless of if I've been at a job for 17 years or 2 years. I think it's important to make sure you still have challenges and that you are still have the challenges and also are, adding value and also fulfilling your own satisfaction. So I think we all, and those are questions that it's really important to ask is like, how am I still contributing and making this better? Or, so.
Yep. Oh, those are very, very important. And I think a lot of people during the pandemic have kind of been very introspective with all of the changes. So yeah,
Yes.
that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And so we are coming up to our last kind of batch of questions, which are kind of related together. So, do you have a mentor or some other person in your life who inspires you in your career? And if so, how have they influenced you? And then also, I think related to this is your leadership style, if you would describe that.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So the mentor one is in ways it's hard because I've never had like a formal mentor, but throughout my years, I've had people who have influenced me and I have a lot of people who inspire me. The person I think that's been in my life the longest is my sister. She's like 5 years older and she's a director, some software development stuff at Oracle. And she's been doing that for a really long time. But I think how the reason she's kind of like been my mentor is because when I was, my mother died when I was 4. And so she had to take on a lot of responsibility at a young age. And she kind of, in a way, just set an example of who to be. And I didn't really have that necessarily from other people, but she somehow was able to set this kind of example of, um, taking on education and having higher goals and things like that. And I think that's what really kind of set me on a path of success with going to college and graduate school. And in fact, we were in grad school together. We lived together, but we were in different programs. But, she has always kind of set a really good example of professionalism and skill. And the other thing I kind of admire about her that I've adopted, we're very different personalities in a way, but one thing that I really like is how she's always been an encourager to people. Like that's how she really encourages her people that she works, that she leads, basically her team. And she's really good at figuring out what they need so that they can do the best work that they can. And I think a lot of times managers don't really stop to think, well, this is a person, with needs and really, if we want them to do well for this company, we have to make sure that their needs are being met. So I think she's set an example of that kind of servant leadership. And so that, my own leadership style, I would say I'd like to be somewhat like that. It's hard to say, but that's something that I really kind of admire about her. So, yes.
All right. Well, thank you. You shared a lot of great ideas, a lot of good resources, a lot about you as a person and as a leader in Colorado libraries. So I want to once again thank Rose Nelson for joining us today for this Spotlight series. Thanks a lot, Rose.
Thanks, Christine.